Hello everyone. Today I'd like to share with you a tricky 3-card blind puzzle that was pulled from the main event that happened in June. Thank you to Kanar for bringing this interesting match to my attention. As always, in a 3-card blind puzzle, both players have a deck of 3 cards that begins the game in their opening hand, and they do not lose the game for drawing cards while their library is empty. Both players know the contents of each other's decks and are assumed to make plays to prioritize winning or force a stalemate if a win is not possible. Your task will be to determine whether the player going first wins, ties, or loses this match. The decks involved are Generous Plunderer, Sandstone Needle, and Stasis versus Forest, Hexdrinker, and Pick Your Poison. The Generous Plunderer player will be taking the first turn of the game. Alright, pause the video and take a minute to consider what the outcome of this match will be, and then we will review the answer. Okay, so hopefully you've taken a good amount of time here to consider the outcome, because there's a lot of moving parts in this puzzle. First, I'd like to cover some of the elements here that may have tripped you up. To begin, let's take a close look at Generous Plunderer's ability that creates treasures. The ability reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token. When you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token. This ability is relevant for a few reasons. First off, Generous Plunderer's second ability allows it to do damage to the defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control whenever it attacks, and treasures are artifacts, so that gives Generous Plunderer the opportunity to push for some extra damage. Because Sandstone Needle can only produce red mana, those treasures are also critical if the Generous Plunderer player intends to play Stasis. From here, I think things will be easiest to explain if we actually play out the match. The Plunderer player is going to start the game by playing their Sandstone Needle, which enters the battlefield tapped. The Hexdrinker player will then open the game by playing their Hexdrinker. Next, the Generous Plunderer player is going to play their Generous Plunderer. Alright, here's where things may have gotten tricky for you. The Hexdrinker player does have the opportunity to level up Hexdrinker here, but doing so will result in them losing the game. If they level up their Hexdrinker, the following turn the Generous Plunderer player is going to produce a treasure and play Stasis. And Stasis will prevent both the Hexdrinker player's forest as well as the treasures they received from their opponent from untapping. This means that the Hexdrinker player won't have mana to cast Pick Your Poison to remove Stasis. At this point, the Generous Plunderer player will produce a treasure every turn to pay for their own stasis, as well as donate a treasure to their opponent. Once their opponent has 20 treasures, they can attack with their Generous Plunderer and use its second ability to do 20 damage directly to their opponent. This means that the Hexdrinker player is going to need to leave their forest untapped to threaten the ability to play Pick Your Poison on a later turn. From here, the Hexdrinker player is going to have to attack, even into the untapped Generous Plunderer. The reason for this is that the Generous Plunderer has Menace. Because Generous Plunderer and Hexdrinker both have 2 power, if the Generous Plunderer attacks first, then it will win the race, and Menace will allow it to attack into the Hexdrinker without worry of being blocked. So now that the Hexdrinker is attacking, the Generous Plunderer player does have the opportunity here to accept a tie by blocking and trading the 2 creatures with each other. The question is, does the Generous Plunderer player have any additional tricks up their sleeve that will allow them to have a better outcome than accepting the tie on this turn? So let's consider the options available to the Generous Plunderer player if they take the damage from Hexdrinker. During their upkeep, they could produce a treasure and give a treasure to their opponent to play Stasis and adhere to their original game plan. As we already mentioned, however, the Hexdrinker player would be able to play Pick Your Poison on the following turn and force them to sacrifice the Stasis. This will give the Hexdrinker player the freedom to level up their Hexdrinker again. And if the Generous Plunderer ever wants to produce treasures to try to push for extra damage, the Hexdrinker can use those treasures to level up faster. For this reason, playing Stasis would be a losing line for the Generous Plunderer player, so it isn't an option for them anymore. There is one more option available to the Generous Plunderer player, however, and that is just to accept the race against Hexdrinker. So in this case, the Generous Plunderer is just going to attack the Hex Drinker player for 2 and pass the turn. The Hex Drinker player's situation is unchanged, so they are simply going to just attack with Hex Drinker yet again. These exchanges of attacks will continue until the Plunderer player begins their turn at 4 life while the Hex Drinker player is at 6 life. During the upkeep of this turn, the Generous Plunderer player is going to produce a treasure and give the Hex Drinker player a tapped treasure. This will allow the Generous Plunderer to attack for an additional point of damage, putting the Hex Drinker player at 3 life. The treasure does give the Hex Drinker player extra mana to level up faster, but it has come too late. The Hex Drinker player will only reach level 2, so when they attack back, they're going to put the Generous Plunderer player down to 2 life, and then the Generous Plunderer player is going to repeat this treasure making process where they will produce a treasure for themselves and a treasure for the Hex Drinker player, and use Generous Plunderer to attack for the final 3 points of damage to claim the win. So the conclusion here is that the Generous Plunderer player does in fact win this match. I think this was a pretty interesting puzzle, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you enjoyed this puzzle, you can find others like it in the playlist of puzzles on this channel, which will be linked in the description of this video. I would also like to remind everyone that the 3-card blind main event tournament is currently running, and you will have until the 7th of the month to submit your deck through the website. Thanks for watching everyone, and see you soon.